Assalamu alaikum, Sidra.
Walaikum assalam.
How are you?
I'm fine, alhamdulillah.
We'll start soon.
Okay, that's fine.
Stephen, good evening.
Yes, I'm ready, so it's fine.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome everybody to this session of the Gulf Cultural Club today, where we'll be hot debate actually, Islam, modernity, and gender issues. And I hope today that we get kind of under the skin of some of the cutting debates at the moment that are raging in the West. That's gone beyond the questions of, women's role in society and so on. It's about gender itself and what gender means. So I hope today these questions and many more are tackled by our three venerable speakers. And we're really lucky today to be joined by Dr. Mariam Rafai, an academic and quite an inspiring intellectual in my point of view, from what I've heard her speak in other community forums. So we have Dr. Amina in the room, who's an academic and author, and I'll introduce them specifically when they speak and give them a better introduction. And we have Sidra Naeem, who's a teacher who joins us online, alongside lots of other participants who are currently online and are watching the live stream of the session. I'm Dr. Ala Shahabi, and I look forward to listening to our speakers alongside our audience. And
so can you make Sidra the second one?
Okay, so Sidra's going to be a second. So I'm just starting with the order that I have on my notes. But we'll give each speaker roughly 6-7 minutes.
What, 15 minutes?
15? I mean, the debate's going to be hot on this topic, I can already tell. Dr. Mariam first.
Okay. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. First, I would like to thank Muassasat Al-Abrar or Abrar House for inviting me to be a part of this talk today. And I did specify or mention 6 points to talk about. And if I have time, I will talk about them all. If not, so I will just stop where I am. So Lady Zainab alayhi salam has a great position among Muslims in general and among Shiite in particular, as Western intellectuals admired her for the strength of her personality and the solidity of her position with her brother Imam Hussein alayhi salam in Karbala. On this occasion, I will try to shed light on the values that can contribute to build a conscious personality of contemporary women. First one. On the first point, using dialogue as an approach to truth. Lady Zainab alayhi salam relied on an authentic approach in the Holy Quran, which is dialogue, in her dealing with the enemies of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, especially Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad and Yazid ibn Muawiyah. This interaction was in the form of dialogue, not in the form of sermon, as codified by some Islamic history books and hadith books. She is the daughter of the Quran school, learned dialogue and mastered the power of his language. And if there is someone who does not need dialogue, then it is God. Except that he stripped his prophet of the power of authority and the power of material wealth, so that there would be no oppression or deception, even with good intentions, so people would follow the religion out of fear or greed. And he left his prophet only with the language of dialogue to show people the truth. Ayah said, and we did not send any messenger except in the language of his people to make it clear to them. The language of dialogue that was distributed in the wording of say or qawlun more than 1,700 times in the Holy Quran. That is an average of 3 times per page, with a conjugation of more than 40 times. Qala, yaqulu, he say, they say, she said. Even the animals was participating in the dialogue in Quran. The language of dialogue that revealed the freedom of the other to express his opinion against religion. So his opinion was immortalized in the immortality of the Quran. And his opinion was beautified as all the verses were beautified with the finest eloquence without practicing the Quran, a rhetorical distortion or derogatory statement of the opponent. The language of dialogue that was often based on the expression of the other by the relative noun who, whom, alladhi, alladina, so that the issue is centered on the idea and not on the person to avoid sensitivity in diagnosis. The language of dialogue that demonstrated the justice of the Quran with the fair mathematical calculation that divided the Quran into two halves, half for the ruling and half for the dialogue. With these fair rules of dialogue, Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam overcame the enemies of Imam Hussein until she spoiled them the joy of the victory by killing her brother. She explained that the real victory was for the martyrs, not the killers, not for the killers. So I would like to read her sentences about that, but just to gain time, I will go or skip to the second point. Islam is a victim of extremism, is not a religion of extremism. Extremism. Among the blessing of the dialogue that Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam had with Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad and Yazid ibn Muawiyah was that she revealed their religion identities. So Ibn Ziyad said, praise be to God who exposed you, killed you, and belied your recent events. But to answer that, first, Allah is not a killer, as he mentioned. Second, God did not expose Islam as a lie. Otherwise, Hussein, peace be alayhi salam, would not have said that I went out to seek reform in the nation of my grandfather. From here, it is proven that Ibn Ziyad was a hypocrite who never belonged to Islam. And like him, Yazid ibn Muawiyah, when he said Hashim played with the kingdom, no news came and no revelation came down. Accordingly, it is clear that Islam was and still a victim of hypocrites and a victim of their extremism and terrorism. Karbala proved that Islam is a victim of extremism and not a religion of extremism. We have 11 imams, and even the 12th one will be killed. So how Islam is a religion of extremism? I'm not here defending Islam. I'm just making clear for someone who wants to accuse the Islam about terrorism. So how 11 imams or 12 imams gonna be killed? How Islam is a religion of extremism, and how the 12 imam was killed as a cause or as a reason of extremism of other hypocrites people that they say about themselves that they are Muslim, and in the truth they are not. Third point, the testimony of women in Islam. Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam rendered a great service to Islamic history by mentioning the details of what happened in Karbala, a testimony from a strong woman who was not afraid of the Umayyad policy of concealing or falsifying these details, while many men retracted this testimony for fear. Yes, the testimony of women is not always half the testimony of men. A testimony of women replaces the testimony of many men, like Karbala, what happened in Karbala, and the testimony of women overcomes the testimony of men, as the verse of Mula'ana mentioned. Ayat al-Mula'ana offers a way out for husband. If a husband has accused his wife but cannot come up with proof, he can swear the li'an, the oath of condemnation as Allah commanded. This means that he brings here before the imam and states what he is accusing her for. The ruler then asks him to swear 4 times by Allah in front of 4 witnesses, and also the wife should do the similar shahada, and her testimony in this case will be the strongest. And then nobody can say that her testimony in here is half. So she is in need of another woman as a witness to complete her testimony against the man. This title may lead us to talk about an important matter, which is that Islam is always accused of exception and not of the general basics. For example, the issue of women's testimony, half of man's testimony, was in the verse of debt only, and it was in the form of advice, not in the form of imposition. Muslims are asking for debt nowadays without testimony to ensure it, neither by man witnesses nor by women. Also, in the issue of inheritance, the woman inherits half of the man's in just 4 or 5 cases. But there is more than 30 cases, the woman inherits more than a man, the same as him, or she inherits and he isn't inherit anything. The same issue about the accusation that the Quran is masculine when using pronoun. And the fact is that the basis of abbreviation is one of the foundations of language. Is it a rule discovered by the European linguist? His name Otto Harry Jespersen in 1924. Since the Arabic language in the Quran discourse is an eloquent language, then it is based on the basis of abbreviation in the discourse, not on the preference of the male pronoun over the female. God Almighty ended the aforementioned verse by saying, God has prepared for them forgiveness and great reward. He didn't say in the Quran in Arabic, lahum wa lahunna. He said them. So the verse is mentioned the woman and the man. If you imagine that the Quran, the Holy Quran is in this form, please listen. Indeed, the Muslim man and Muslim woman, the believing man and the believing woman, the obedient man and obedient woman, the truthful man and truthful woman, the patient man and patient woman, the humble man and humble woman, the charitable man and charitable woman, the fasting man and fasting woman, the men who guard their private parts and the women who do so, and the men who remember Allah often and the women who do so, for them Allah has prepared forgiveness and the great reward. If the whole Quran was in the same form, it would be really boring. So the origin in Islam is the equality of rights and duties between the two sexes, in addition to some few provisions that are specific to one without the other. The fourth point, the concept of beauty according to Sayyida Zainab. Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam said in response to Ibn Ziyad accused question, how did he say to her, how did you see God's actions towards your brother or towards your family? She said, I only saw beautiful, or I only saw beauty, tarjama. Beauty, according to Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam, is the beauty of principles and values. Is it the beauty of self-awareness, awareness of the importance of the intellect in the degree of its knowledge and culture, not the beauty of cosmetic surgeries that impose on women the conditions of man in standards beauty, nor that beauty centered around her body rather than her intellect, which made women to this day the victim of sex trade. Unfortunately, the concept of beauty today has become a very painful concept for women, as Naomi Wolf writes and mentioned in her book, The Beauty Myth, which translated in French, Quand la beauté fait mal. Fifth point, unseen does not mean superstition. Al-Ghaib is unseen, I think translation is right, Al-Ghaib. Sayyida Zainab has challenged Yazid ibn Muawiyah by telling him what will happen next in the future. For example, O Yazid, conspire against us all you want and make all the attempts you wish to erase our name. By Allah, you shall never eradicate our path and remembrance. Our revelation shall be everlasting. How did you know that? How did you know what will happen in the future? So, the unseen is always accused of being a superstition, but there is a big difference between them. To understand the superstition, you have to break the intellect and disable it. But to understand the unseen that Allah mentioned in his book, you need to use your intellect strongly. If you want to draw that, for example, I wish to not take too much time. If you're gonna draw that, this is This is intellect, okay? The unseen, superstition. They are both after the intellect, yes? Both out of intellect. But intellect can accept that. He's using his capacity to accept that. How Allah created samawat, the skies, how Allah created this world. Yeah, the intellect accepted. But if he wants to accept that, he needs to broke itself to accept superstition that say, when Allah wants to create the world, he vomited snake. Then after that, he vomited sun. Then after that, like Ilah Bamba in African tribe. Then Allah vomits the last creator, which is human being. So if you want to believe in superstition, you have to disable your intellect. But if you want to believe on unseen or what Allah tell about what is the creator, what is behind the creator, you should use your intellect, not to disable it. Okay, quick to 6 points. Modernity and openness are conditions of Islamic identity. Islam has urged the realization of the intellect. Sorry, my accent is still French and English. Sorry for that. As the intellect is a word that is mentioned in the Quran in the form of verb, not in the form of adjective or infinitive. And this is to emphasize its use. The intellect is the only instrument that the more a person uses in science, the greater his efficiency in development and the renewal increased. Roger Garaudy was a great modernist philosopher. He wrote a book before he converted to Islam with Charles Perler. The name of this book is The Mosque is the Mirror of Islam. And it is one of the most wonderful books written before his conversion to Islam. He was inspired by the inscriptions in mosque, have circles and circles that they represent the belief in monotheism as Muslims believe. He also wrote books after his conversion to Islam. Name of these books, I will mention the two important books, Grave Diggers, the civilization that digs its grave for humanity, and the other book is Promises of Islam, calling for interest in science as a condition for the rise of nations, because Islam does not suffer from a phobia of modernity as long as it is modernity that respects the honesty of science and human dignity. Also, Maurice Bucaille proved in his book, The Torah, the Bible, the Quran, and Science, a study in the light of modern science, that the Islam is not against science. But Islam is pushing you to use the science. Unfortunately, there are those who have exploited the word modernity in a wrong sense. Today, there are those who use the word universalism, al-alamiyya, universalism, okay, in order to promote globalization that we thought was supposed to be the exchange of experiences and goods. But in fact, it used the third world countries as a consumer, not as a producer. With its own, not as a producer, with its own expertise and goods. This is what the book of The Global Trap referred to. The author of it is Hans-Peter Martin and Harald Schumann. They said there are two great economists proved that in this world there is a 20% lives in the expense of goods of 80%, which is what Naomi Chomsky said before them. Islam is not against modernity, but it is against misuse of modernity. Muhammad Abid al-Jabri, a great Moroccan philosopher, said, globalization is one thing and universalism is another. Universalism opens up to the world, to other cultures, preserving cultural differences and ideological differences. As for globalization, it is the negation of the other and the substitution of culture penetration for ideological conflict. The correct position or the right position is the dialogue of civilizations and respect for differences, and not the dissemination of the idea of clash of civilization as promoted by Huntington, Fukuyama, and even Bernard Lewis. As for openness, by the way, those people, there's some people who want to criticize their ideas and saying those that are the intellectuals of Pentagon. As for openness, Islam does not reject positive openness, as God Almighty says, "O people, indeed we created you, formed a male and a female, and we made you into peoples and tribes." There is an example of openness in the Holy Quran. Is it the use of 200 words out of 9 non-Arabic languages, such as Aramaic, Syrian, and Greek, etc. Muslim scholars wrote books on that, such as المعرب للجواليقي والمهذب في مواقع في القرآن من المعرب للسيوطي. The position of Islam with modernity and openness is the position of acceptance with the condition of compatibility, not with the position of complete dissolution or the position of complete rejection. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mariam. That was pretty intense and condensed. But just to repeat some of the key points, just to kind of solidify them. You talked about the dialogue in the role of Sayyida Zainab, the testimony of women and all the variation and different rights of women in Islam. The globalization and modernity, particularly in regarding to the universalization of knowledge as a negation of the other in the West, vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And finally, in here, the importance of discourse, particularly in not reducing it to pronouns and going beyond the pronouns. So yeah, that was just a brief summary of Dr. Mariam Rafai, who I didn't introduce really properly. She is an academic that hails from Morocco originally, and she holds degrees and a PhD in Islamic studies and comparative jurisprudence. So we're really lucky to have such a knowledgeable woman with us today. Our second guest tonight, we'll move on to Zoom, is Sidra Naeem. She has been a qualified teacher for over 20 years. She works as a chaplain for Anglo-Ruskin University and also volunteers as a chaplain in the educational, health and retail sectors. As an active volunteer, she has facilitated mental health, interfaith and cultural diversity. She has many roles, as I can see here, particularly active in Essex. And you'll find her full bio in the invitation. So I invite Sidra to speak. If we can see, can we see her on the screen? Yeah, Sidra, can you hear us? You're free to begin.
Thank you very much. First of all, Jazakallah khair, everybody, for inviting me on this platform. Sorry I can't be with you face to face. I would have loved to have been there, but unfortunately I had a radio interview today at 6 o'clock, so there was no way that I would have made it. I am a Sunni. I am also an alima, as well as all of those things that you've said. I also represent the Queen in Britain as well. Obviously it's the King now, but that's something else which I will talk about today within my role about modernity, which is exactly why I am mentioning that. I've been given 15 minutes to speak, and obviously there's only a little bit that I can cover within 15 minutes, but hopefully with the question and answers and with the debate that we'll do later on, I'll be able to cover a little bit more. I have got a PowerPoint presentation, which I'm going to put on now, and I'll be talking a little bit about the modern aspects of the woman nowadays. Okay, so Islam, modernity and gender issues. So basically, in Islam, women were oppressed and put down, but before Islam came. Okay, so if we look at this chart here, even though all the previous prophets had come right up to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was all sorts of really bad things happening. Women were being oppressed pre-Islamic days. And these are just some of the things that were happening. Baby girls were buried alive. There was sexual slavery going on, which the previous sister mentioned, nudity, persecution of women. Women were traded and married off as part of business deals. They could not inherit own land or property. They never, ever had a say in lawmaking either. So they were treated really badly. But once Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam came, women were actually given status and rights, and they were actually liberated. So Islam actually modernized the religion. And did you know that Islam was actually the first religion which liberated women, and the first women to allow women rights that they had never had before? And these rights, the principal difference in the way these rights came about is very, very important. In other religions, men gave women rights. And in the West, rights became part of the law only eventually after women had been through much hardship, great political struggles, and partly due to the necessity of women working in factories during wars. Just recently, within the last century, you know, if you look at the suffragette movement or the feminist movement, for example, that had to take place in order to get freedom. Whereas in Islam, those rights were given by God, by Allah, through revelation 1400 years ago. And those laws cannot be reversed even by a parliamentary decision. So some of the things which are relevant actually to nowadays as we move into the modern era within the world. The first one is actually education. Now, nowhere does it say in Islam that women should not be educated. The very first word, did you know, that was revealed in the Quran was the word read. And that was a command to all of mankind, not just to men. And what's happened there is that because a man's main responsibility within Islam is to be the financial provider, then people have taken it upon themselves to educate men, because they're the ones who, in Islam, have to go out and work and then financially provide for the woman. But it doesn't say anywhere that a woman should be uneducated. In fact, in the past, many, many women have been very, very highly educated. And I'm going to give one example here of Fatima al-Fihri in 859 AD. Did you know that the very first, oldest university, the University of Qarawiyyin in Fez, Morocco, was actually founded by her. And she was actually a Muslim. And she was very well educated. And not only that, did you know she taught herself in the university science and so many other subjects herself she taught in the university. So I'm actually bringing this aspect in because the lovely lady who introduced me said that I was a teacher. So these are some of the role models that I have looked at before I pursued my career as a teacher and a lecturer at university. The next stage in a woman's life is to earn. Now, a lot of people say a woman's role is in the home in Islam. Yes, I agree. A woman's role, the first and foremost important role, is actually bringing up the children. You know, if you think about it, naturally, we are made to bring up children. We're multitasking, we produce milk to breastfeed them. We are kind, caring, natured, all scientific reasons why we make very good mothers. However, it does not stop us to work as well. So even in the days of Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, his wife was a very successful businesswoman. He himself gave permission, did you know, to a female physician and nurse to help wounded soldiers on the battlefield. Now, Fatima, his daughter, Fatima radiallahu anha, she also worked on the battlefield as well, and she helped wounded soldiers. So we've got good role models like Khadija and Fatima who actually did work. Muslim women have the right to earn and keep their own money. Islam was the first religion to give women the right to personal ownership of property and wealth. This right does not change when she marries. For the first time in history, women were granted economic independence in Islam. The money they bring into marriage is theirs as well as the money they earn. And that is actually a very important privilege that women have in Islam because they are not the main providers financially. They do not need to spend a penny on the family. So they can earn as much as they like and they can keep their own money. Marriage in Islam, what's hers is hers and what's yours is hers as well. So tell me again how Islam gives women no rights. This also, did you know, stops men using rich women or marrying them for their money, which is exactly what was happening before Islam came. In the UK, did you know, it was not until the early 20th century, after many years of struggle during the women's rights movement, that married women were able to exercise separate rights over their earnings. And did you know that before that, everything went automatically to their husbands, whatever they earned? So in Islam, we actually had that right 1400 years ago. The next aspect I'm going to cover is hijab. Now, did you know that hijab does not stop you doing anything? It does not oppress women whatsoever. That is actually a picture of me. Those of you who know me, I'm actually quite a sporty person. And I wear a hijab and I do all sports. And that picture in particular is of me scuba diving underwater. Yet I am fully covered. So what a hijab actually does is that it gives you more freedom to talk to the opposite gender in a way, because the hijab makes the statement that a Muslim woman is not available and not interested in any advances. So dressing modesty actually allows interaction between men and women to be more safe. Okay. I mentioned the Queen for a reason, okay, for a very big reason. One, she has just sadly passed away, but also one of her representatives. And even though I am one of her representatives, I still wear a hijab and I do all my duties as a Muslim modern woman. In fact, I do so much dawah wherever I go on my travels. So hijab does not change you in any shape or form. You can still be modern, you can still meet important people, and you can still dress really, really well. I go everywhere the same with my own identity. Hijab does not change your identity. Being modern does not change your identity as a modern Muslim woman. Also, speaking in public, I will bring up here. If you look at Aisha radiallahu anha, mentioned I was a Sunni, and if we look at Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's last wife, she actually taught and many, many hadiths to so many people, including men as well. So she actually did do public speaking roles as well, even though, you know, there are certain prohibitions, the way we conduct ourselves, as in business-like manner, business-like tone. It doesn't stop us going out and educating, being teachers, and other really good professions. Okay, the other one, which I really want to touch on, because I sadly see this a lot, is in Islam, we are permitted as women to attend the place of worship. And If you look at role models in the past, again, I mentioned I'm a Sunni Muslim, and we look at Aisha. She actually had a door in a house which led to the masjid. So Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam never ever stopped any of his wives going to the mosque. It was actually a privilege, did you know, given to women that they may offer prayers in their own houses, in the comfort of their homes. And this is actually because of the children, because if you think of Fajr time early in the morning, they may need to breastfeed their children, and they can't do that if they have to go running to the mosque in the morning. So it's actually a benefactor for women that they can read in the comfort of their own homes. This clearly reflects Islam's consideration for women, or where she may be engaged in nursing or other duties. This does not mean she is prohibited or oppressed like the media portrays. Islam, did you know, also accommodates a woman's physiological makeup and takes into consideration her physiological changes. Did you know that women, they can lead the prayers amongst women? So yes, they can lead the prayers. I have done that many, many times amongst women. So it does not stop them being modern in any way. And unfortunately, it's men really who have taken control of mosques, thinking that women can't be here, they're not allowed to come here, getting things out of context. However, I am happily seeing, for example, that the chair of Muslim Council of Britain is a woman. And if it was wrong, they would never have made a chair a woman. And also there are some mosques who have got all-female committees that run along male committees. And the Cambridge Mosque, which I visited recently with some friends, Cambridge Central Mosque is actually one of them, where I actually met a Muslim woman who is actually on the committee who recognized me. I had a good long conversation with her. So if we look into the religion, it does not stop women actually helping out in mosques, doing voluntary work, and also having a all-female committee on a mosque where they can also voice their opinions. So those are the things that I am covering, because they're actually personal to me. And these are some of the other things which granted women modernity, if you like, over 1400 years ago. So Islam was the benefactor of women, the first to accord high status to women, the first to grant rights, the right to live, because before Islam came, women were treated really badly and killed at birth. Social rights, inheritance. Okay, so they were allowed to inherit property, maintenance and economic rights, ownership rights, political rights. Did you know Muslim women were given the right to vote as well? All the khalifas and everything else. Education, I touched upon. Legal rights, like, inheriting property and wealth of their own. Privacy and chastity all comes under the hijab. Respecting menstruation days, so we're looking at the mosque here. Security and protection, which comes in the form of a mahram, for example, with men and brothers, sons, and also hijab, and spiritual rights as well. Okay. Islam, did you know, is the fastest growing religion in the world. And most of the growth is because of women accepting Islam in very high numbers. Some food for thought is, why then is it that women are those who are reverting to Islam if the religion oppresses them and doesn't allow them to be modern? What you really see is culture, not the faith. And if you think about the government in our lands, the government is ruling the land, but not the religion. The religion is normally separate from the government. Even in this country, the Queen's head of the church, but Parliament is actually ruling the land, which is not religious.
Thank you, sister. Thank you for that. I think that was very enlightening, and it was a great overview of the kind of issues that and misconceptions people have about women in Islam. Just to quickly move on so that we can open the floor for debate amongst our audience, I'd like to quickly introduce our last speaker sitting next to me, Dr. Amina Luce, who's originally from the US and has a PhD in Islamic Studies from the University of Exeter in Shia Hadith. She's also quite active in Shia Studies. She's a program leader for the MA in Islamic Studies program at the Islamic College in London, and also the managing editor of probably the most prestigious dedicated journal on Shia Studies, which is the Journal of Shia Islamic Studies. So we have quite intellectuals sitting with us on the panel today on Shia Studies. So Dr. Amna, you have 15 minutes as well to talk on the topic.
Okay. I'll try to live up to that, inshallah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. Yes, it's good to begin with a bit of a dua because this is a very sensitive and possibly inflammatory subject. So I'm going to try to put on my positive hat or my positive hijab and think of positive and helpful things to contribute to the discussion. Alhamdulillah, we had a lot of good contributions and things to think about. And what I would like to ruminate on, so this will be my little bit of positive contribution, inshallah, is what are some things we can do to try to move beyond some of these many debates on questions regarding gender, women, and Islam. I think we can all agree, unless we're living under rocks or something, that women's and gender issues have been probably the largest flagship issues of Islam in the 20th century and the 21st century. And I think in particular, the number two issues which kind of get, how should I say, I don't want to say blown out of proportion, they get a disproportionate amount of discussion in the sort of collective Muslim consciousness is hijab and homosexuality. Those are the two things that will somehow be given all the focus, whereas when you look at all the other issues that are going on in the world, they are sometimes not discussed at all. I mean, just to give a comparison, and I'm not making any statements about hijab or homosexuality, but I just want to point out I can walk down the street in Wilson and I can find Muslims drunk or taking crack. I can go to countries, find any number of unjust political systems and unjust imprisonments, and yet these tend to be sort of, I would say they are flagship issues and identity issues. And so I do think one thing that is helpful to do is consider, and I have thoughts on this, but I'm not going to share them necessarily, why these sorts of issues are fronts for the major identity challenges that have been faced in the Muslim world. Even if you just want to take something as, what women are wearing, such as in the situation in a certain country very recently that some of us may be aware of. Why is it that this, which, too many people objectively throughout history would say probably isn't as big deal as, say, mass torture or genocide, for example, why is it that women's clothing becomes such a major issue of public focus to wage battles surrounding things like, Islam versus the West, or nativist authority, or resistance to various ideological systems, and so forth. I think just acknowledging that happens can help diffuse the discussion a little bit, because whether you're discussing some attitudes towards women's clothing or what women, quote unquote, are or are not allowed to do, it tends to be women who suffer the most because we're getting pressure from all sides. So, for example, although I do believe that I do believe in the hijab, obviously, and I believe that modesty is a central value of spirituality and part of the human dignity. But when someone is loading a lot of other things on top of that, like I need to resist feminism or resist westernization or resist whatever through my hijab, that starts to make my life a lot more difficult. So I think acknowledging the other issues that are sometimes loaded onto these topics can help to, yes, to diffuse them and handle them in a way which is more compassionate and more constructive, rather than with a sort of knee-jerk or judgmental or destructive response. Something very important was mentioned too, and that is dialogue. This is something that I think is to some degree new within my lifetime. And when I think back maybe 20 years ago and what I understand of the time beforehand, I don't think there was as much discussion about gender issues or women and Islam. It seems to me there was more of a one-way transmission of things. It was basically sermons, so to speak, and sermons have a place. But these sorts of issues do benefit from dialogue because they allow people to bring in their lived experiences and to understand a variety of experiences and variety of perspectives. And I do think that one thing that has also evolved throughout my lifetime is that the types of issues that come up when discussing women in Islam have changed. Some of them, not all of them. I mean, just in terms of what I experience or you know, asked about on a regular basis, there's things that I would consider to be, wow, that's still an issue. Like, I'm just surprised, why is this still an issue? Versus things that are quite new. You know, I mean, sometimes people will ask me things like, actually, I don't even want to bring up issues, but I think you know what I mean. There's sometimes some people who have a very restrictive way of thinking. You know, my husband won't let me go outside of the house or that sort of thing. You know, all the way to a very new way of thinking, especially in this generation, you know, who are like, well, if a woman can be an astronaut and go to the moon, then what's the deal with moon sighting and so forth? So we have a broader spectrum of issues, but it is good to ask why that has not necessarily led to a change in all of the issues. Why are there still some questions that do come up that, in my opinion, shouldn't be coming up in this day and age? But in any case, dialogue does help to bring these things out. At the risk of sounding terribly stereotypical, I do think dialogue is a little bit more associated with women and sermons are a little bit more associated with men. Obviously, we have exceptions, like the sermon of Bibi Zainab, peace be upon her. But just from a sort of archetypal perspective, women are, you know, sort of considered to be a little bit more, more conversational, more listeners. I know this is a broad generalization because philosophers have dialogues. But I do think perhaps it is something archetypally feminine that can be brought into the discussion too. I also think that there is a value in, I don't think we have to necessarily idolize modernity. Am I allowed to be negative now?
Of course you are, yeah.
I mean, to be honest, you know, one of the preoccupations of Muslims in the 20th century in particular, because I think this is something we're also getting beyond, has been to prove that Islam is modern or Islam is compatible with modernity. And yes, there were many useful things that came about in the past century, you know, various technologies or political systems or whatnot. But there's also a lot of things that didn't work so well. And I think we are living in the era of the replacement of modernity, if you will. I mean, to be blunt, we are seeing currently with what's going on around the world, you know, the beginnings of the effects of climate change, for example, the vast socioeconomic inequities, famine and so forth, that modernity has not saved the planet. It may be a stepping stone to something better, inshallah, one can hope. But the point is, whatever the system of modernity was, it's clearly not going to be able to persist 500 years or 1,000 years. There's going to be something else because we are being forced by circumstances to change things. And so I think it's good to move a bit beyond the question of is Islam modern or trying to fit into that paradigm when the world around us is changing. And I have to admit, this is something I was reflecting on with respect to the funeral of the Queen, that, you know, as much as people might celebrate secular political systems or you know, democracy and so forth, people's hearts are still very attached to certain traditional things, whether it be the tradition of you know, monarchy or ancestral leadership, the tradition of organized religion and so forth. And this is what brought all the people to the you know, the final ceremonies for the Queen. It wasn't a more impersonal system. And I'm not necessarily advocating for any sort of, you know, return to doing everything in the pre-modern manner, but I'm just saying it is clear from things like that that tradition does have a certain hold over people, even in the quote-unquote modern world. And as a Muslim, I would say there are many things in our tradition that I do think are, by tradition I mean pre-modern tradition, that have a lot to contribute to how we handle social issues and other issues today. For example, I'm going to start departing from some of the views of the better panelists because it's fun. With respect to the concept of beauty, there is in fact a lot of a heavily spiritual component to beauty in the pre-modern tradition and even within our tradition, narrations. Not beauty in the sense of commodification or commercialization, capitalism, you need your nose surgery and your 500 outfits and whatnot, because that's a destructive sort of, it is both objectifying and it is destructive on many levels. But there's a sense that spirituality in and of itself also reflects in a sort of physical beauty, just as Allah is the ultimate, the natural world is beautiful. Hazrat Fatima, peace be upon her, is described as having been extremely beautiful, at least in the Shi'i hadith. Imam Ali, very beautiful, Hazrat Qasim, Hazrat Abbas. Where are you going to find the narration that says they're not handsome or they're not beautiful? There's a sense that because they had this, spiritual height, that this also somehow reflected on their physical form, without the nose jobs and so forth. Similarly, one of the ideas that gets tossed around a lot nowadays is men are emotional, that was some sort of slip, wasn't it? Yeah, men are logical and women are emotional. And yet, when you look at their tradition, and incidentally, it does go back in the biblical tradition as well as the the early Islamic history, men, they're also emotional, they care, they have feelings. It's a part of spirituality. And these are things in our tradition that I feel sometimes they do get lost in the present era, trying to fit Islam or Islamic ideals into certain slots. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that we have to revert to the past and have, the Safavid Empire and the Ottoman Empire, and because clearly there were things that were but I'm just saying that not everything that's happened in the past 150 years or so has been the ideal solution. And there were ideas that, perhaps use for inspiration to find a new way. So basically, I'm saying we don't need to necessarily fit everything into the paradigm of modernity, especially when we are heading somewhere new as human beings, to take what is good from whatever era we have. So those are a few things that I think can begin to be taken into consideration in some of these discussions to maybe make them a little bit more nuanced. I use one keyword that I do think is very important, and that is compassion. I think sometimes when we discuss these things, compassion is lacking. Now, not always, I'm not saying it's here. Sometimes there is a lot of compassion. For example, when you hear a woman coming and speaking about domestic abuse, a lot of people will be compassionate to that. I'm not saying it's a Muslim-only problem, by the way, but it does happen. But sometimes there is that sort of just judgmental, shut it down, this is how it is, and we're not going to discuss it because I know what's right, because, I don't know, people just, they know what's right because they know what's right and they're going to tell you what's right. And, instead of opening up to it and, trying to understand things on a deeper level and a more human level, as they say, what comes from the heart reaches the heart. And this is one of those issues that touches all of us because it's part of the human condition. It's one of the more challenging aspects of the human condition, how Allah created everyone with the same gender and, the same everything. We wouldn't have the complexity of the human experience that we have today. So I think that appreciating that can also help to try to find compassionate solutions to some of these challenges we all face.
Thank you, Sister Amna, for that. And I think you also, thank you. To all our speakers. I was I saw the development of the conversation move to the present day issues that we're facing regarding gender. Before I ask my question, I'd love to hear yours first. And we have Dr. Laith and Dr. Karen, but go ahead, Dr. Laith, I saw your hand first.
If I may, thank you all speakers. Let me just prompt the thinking and for you to facilitate how you want to quickly answer. Implicit in what you're saying, referencing the word Islam, and implicit, it is someone's understanding of Islam, yours or someone's, ours. And I'd like to, academically, just to have slight differentiation here. What do we mean exactly by Islam? I know the Quran is very specific. I know we have historical records of how Muslims lived during the Khilafah Rashida. We have records of how Muslims then lived as they opened up to other cultures from different parts of the world. And we have instructions from different seminaries on how Muslims should live. So we have lots of fixed references, but when we talk about Islam and women in Islam, what are we talking about exactly? Which traditions, which definitions, whom's understanding? So that's one, I think, right at the set-go, we need to have a very, very clear reference here. And whose definition is that? And the second thing, the issue of gender is quite profound, you're right. And fundamentally, the social fabric has changed so much in the last 1400 years, especially with industrialization. And that puts us back. If we were to fix the definition of women and Islam in any of these different things that I referenced, then we end up with a very fixed definition, and a lot of Muslims would say, this is not compatible. I'm sorry, but I cannot live with that. And some of the Muslims would argue, maybe we need a deeper understanding, and we need to open a better review of how we should understand Islam to live the future, not the past. So, as I said, implicit, I think there is here a call to be more specific in how we define Islam and how we look to the future. So I'll leave it, Dr. Ala, for you to see how best to navigate that question through the three presentations, excellent presentations that we had.
Thank you. Let's take a couple of questions. We've got that academic one from Dr. Laith. I saw Dr. Karen's, I saw you raise your hand second. Yeah.
Thank you for fascinating presentations. And I was very interested in what the sister said about Zainab from the early history of Islam. But I was wondering, could the panelists tell us about women now in the 20th century, Muslim women who could be role models? Maybe the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, I don't know, I've heard a few things about her recently. Yes. And other people that maybe the younger generation could relate to as people living now that they can see as role models rather than people from history.
The role models have all died.
That's not very inspiring, but anyway, Laith, since you're next to Karen. I mean, sorry, Shabir.
That's all right.
Yeah. It's been a long day. It's been a long day.
Thank you very much. One name that I would suggest, Karen, perhaps is the martyr Bintul Huda, who was a very current, very dynamic lady. And in fact, if you may recall, Saddam knew his history very well. And he said that I'm not going to let another Zainab survive when he martyred her brother. So that I think is a poignant sort of lady to remember. And if one reads about it, in fact, she's written exactly what's been talked about. And I'm just doing a bit of research about what the role of women and so on should be. My question is, this whole issue of gender fluidity and other aspects that have come about on the horizon, not in the last 40 years, perhaps last 10 years, really, the way we have been moving. And there are a lot more pressing issues that one of the panelists said, issue of economics, issue of war, issue of genocide taking place. Why is it that in the West, gender issue dominates when other economic matters, which are more profound, really do not find any space?
That's a very good question. Thank you, Shabir. Let's take these three and come back for a second round. The first question, Dr. Lates, regarding, which Islam are we talking about? Islam as a construct. What are we thinking about here? Islam. Are we? What Islam are we? When you're speaking to, is it a modern day one? Is it a pre-Islamic one? Dr. Amina.
It's a big question, and we could be here for a very long time. I'll just give my own personal view. Obviously, there are two understandings of the word Islam. One is a verb or an action, to submit to Allah, to align yourself with Allah, a spiritual act, which from that angle, someone could do in any era or any background. But usually when we talk about Islam, we are talking about the socio-cultural phenomenon, the world religion of Islam with, everything that it entails, whether it's the religious law, the Quran, the Hadith, the tafsir, the customs. I knew a guy once who said that, the most important thing about Islamic culture was that you could go, to any Muslim country and you would find the same food. Right, the rice and the stew. It's true that food is common in a lot of Muslim majority countries, but obviously that's not coming directly from Quran and Hadith. So there's a lot of stuff, the stories, the practices, the architecture, etc. With regards to that Islam, I personally take the view that anyone who self-identifies as a Muslim has a right to a share in the pie, so to speak. That doesn't mean I agree with everyone's practice or viewpoint who is a Muslim, but I don't believe in rampant takfir. Muslims in general seem to have a problem that when they don't like someone's view, they eject them from Islam, certain. Oh, this is going to be terribly controversial for people, but certain people saying Bassem al-Karbalai is not a Shi'i. Okay, whatever he is or isn't, not my problem. But to say he's not a Shi'i or is, that's stretching it. What is he, a Christian? So similarly, when we don't like someone's viewpoint as a Muslim, we say they're not a real Muslim. That this is not Islam. It is their Islam, and then we have to deal with the fact that it might be a harmful view or what we think is a deviant view, but it is still something that's linked to us. So from that angle, I take pretty much everything from the tradition or experience, past or present, while at the same time I do personally assign more truth value to certain things than others. Other opinions may vary. I do think, just with respect to the rest of your question, I do think one of the shifts in the modern world that has happened that I think is very unhealthy for Muslims is that Islam has been treated more as an identity than as the spiritual act, which is manifest through one's physical acts of aligning with the divine. Now, that is to say, I think there has been, especially in the 20th century, a lot more focus on what is quote unquote Islamic than focusing on Allah. When you get a lot of Muslim literature out, you find Islamic is mentioned more than Allah. And obviously, you're going to say, well, they're trying to do what is Islamic to serve Allah, but still, it is a lot of times a focus on an identity and a label, which has a place. But if we don't go beyond that, then it is still about who you are, which is about the ego, which does not really lead to any sort of, how should you say, it ends up just dividing people, and that's why you have, I think, part of the reason why you have so many, debates about who is a real Muslim or is not, instead of just, getting more into the core of what we should be doing. So I do think that's a phenomenon of something that has happened in the present era, and unfortunately it characterizes a lot of our religious discourse, including this subject. In that gender issues and other issues are a lot of times treated as identity issues, and I think that is a modern thing, but that's a slightly different issue.
That might segue into Shabir's question about gender fluidity and how liberalism is trying to move away from this kind of categorization, especially when it comes to sex versus gender. I mean, just bringing the conversation to respond to what we're seeing today, the kind of the debates that we're seeing in the West. Yeah.
I'm not sure I have enough background in history here in particular to really give an answer to that, because you really do have to root it in what's happened beforehand. And I do think industrialization is a factor in that, when a man or woman can basically work on an assembly line for the most part and do the same sort of job. That just change the way things are perceived in society, but it's not the only factor. I think it's a really complex question, and I think there's a lot going on basically, and I don't want to speculate in such a way where I might be not giving a full or complete answer. I think it's different in different areas. I'm from the United States. I think in America, it's part of maybe a broader identity crisis in the country that focus on this sort of thing, which again, it comes from its history. It's not like these things just, happen right now, but every place is going to have its own reasons why certain subjects come to the forefront at certain times.
Great, thank you. Dr. Mariam, there are three questions. One on which Islam or what Islam, and the second one on role models, current day living role models. Third question, or contemporary role models. Third question on this current Western debate on gender.
I would prefer to answer it in Arabic, but I will try my best. Okay, for the question of Dr. Laith Koban about what is the meaning of Islam, and maybe my understanding of Islam will affect the Islam when I talk about it. I think Dr. Laith Koban, since I am from Morocco and you are from Iraq, and I did speak about Islam, my Moroccan identity didn't affect the Islam, so we are okay about the idea of Islam that I give. When I give something which is against your culture as Iraqi of understanding Islam, here we're gonna, you're gonna say, well, yeah, culture affecting Islam. But since you didn't ask me about one of the ideas that I gave, that's not Islam, here we're gonna speak about it. But as identifying Islam is a deen. We're gonna not say that we cannot say that Islam is something like something out of deen. It's a religion. It's a religion of humanity first. Then it's a religion for Muslims. It's a religion that can give everyone his rights and everyone his duties toward the others. So first is a religion of humanity. Somebody said, what's a religion of humanity? It's not a religion for humanity, but this is a message for humanity, as is asking for justice. If I'm gonna affect with my understanding Islam, so I'm gonna wait for your question. Mariam, you said something here that is against Islam, and I think your Moroccan culture is affecting Islam here. Since you didn't ask me this question, so we are okay about the ideas of Islam that I gave, or that Dr. Amina gave, or someone else gave from whatever is British, is Moroccan, is Iraqi, is Bangladesh, is Pakistani. Since the idea that he gave, I'm accepting it, so it's okay. Why I should ask him about what is the meaning of deen, since we are okay about the idea that he gave. I think this is, maybe in Arabic later I can answer more than that, but this is the only my limits in English. About the second question, the doctor,
Contemporary role models.
Yeah, she said
female.
Actually, the role model is always connected with the politics, but with her knowledge. The knowledge of the woman is about her attitude in politics. So Bint al-Huda was alima, was someone who has a big knowledge. She did write books. She did give a lot of information, new information of understanding Islam, but nobody speaking today about her knowledge, but they only mentioning her political attitude. So when you ask me where is the role model nowadays, if there, for example, Dr. Amina is a role model, I will not say she's a role model now until she died, because all the role models should be died, then after we say it's a role model. So for me, where is the Muslim woman from the activity of knowledge? I can say there's a study, a beautiful study of Dr. Khaima Monyo. She was a feminist activist. And after that, she started to be against feminist activities as well. She did make a study about different Muslim women identities from Iran, from Morocco, from Tunisia, from Algeria. About what the study? if the hijab is affecting or it is an obstacle stopping the women from knowledge. This is the study about. And after that, she finished her study by saying, I found that the only strong women who seek the knowledge with hijab. The majority of women with hijab, they are the only women, the category of women who complete the level of knowledge in academic way. This is what she said. And she said that what I was thinking about feminism activities, that the woman with hijab, she's facing this obstacle to continue her studies, is just a lie. I found that the woman with hijab is much stronger. This is what she said in her. I didn't mean that the woman without hijab is not stronger, but I'm telling what is the result of her study. So I wish if you have time to search it and read it. So there is lots of role models nowadays that the Muslim women are too much active in knowledge, in seeking academic levels, much better than men. But the question, where is women today in political parties? I will ask, where is women today in Western from studying philosophy? Nobody today in Western countries stopped the women from studying philosophy. So why is studying philosophy still active in men only? And few women that continue philosophy. And we are in Western. What stopped the woman from that? Why the majority of the midwives is a woman, not a man? They are in the Western countries. What stopped them? So this is a question I can ask you. The women in our countries, in the Arabic and Muslim countries, still face an economic problem. But here, they have this space to go and complete. The government can help them to complete and study. So where is she from philosophy studies? Where is she from other type of academic level? There's a third question maybe, or I finish?
Can I add on the role models?
Okay, really 30 seconds because I want to.
It only takes 30 seconds. Yeah, just more negative thoughts. Today we live in a world of illusion. The role models are social media influencers primarily. The female Muslim role models are on TikTok and Instagram, just like the male role models. Whether that means they're big role models or all the role models are actually dead is another point of discussion, but that's where you will find them.
Dr. Amin, I just want to make it clear with some point you said about Zainab idea about beauty. I'm not against the cosmetic surgeries, please. I'm not against that. The woman she's free to make her beautiful the way she is, but not mentioning some parts in her body just to be sexy for the man. This is what I'm against about. You have to love yourself the way you are. I'm not supposed to go and make my lips much bigger so the man will be, she's beautiful, or cutting lots of parts of my body and make lots of parts of my body bigger so the man, I don't care about the man what he's saying. I am a woman and he should respect me the way I am. There's 300 BBC published article, $300 million Saudi women spend it on makeup only. On makeup only, we didn't count, this is a statistic, not Mariam Rafia is saying. We didn't count the cosmetic surgeries, we didn't count the clothes, we didn't count other type of spending, just makeup. And now we are seeking knowledge. Our countries need knowledge. Doesn't need a woman which is 24 hours thinking how she can show herself tomorrow with another way. Yes, I respect me as well, I like me to be beautiful. But this is not the only goal that I have to follow.
Thank you, thank you. There's a wider debate, not just an Islamic debate about this. Sister Sidra, do you want to come in on any of the three questions?
Yes, I think the main one that I'd like to talk about is about modern day role models. So there's a couple of factors here which stop Muslim role models being around there. The first one is Islamophobia. So, so many women do well, but they're not exposed in newspapers or on the television. They're sort of stopped in their tracks. And I've got a personal, stories about this, for example, where, for example, when I went to Buckingham Palace and I met the Queen and they wouldn't put it in the newspapers because they said no news is, good news is no news to me. Whereas if I went ahead and did something bad, you know, terrorism and all of that, then all of a sudden I would be front page news. So Islamophobia is out there, which actually stops good Muslim role models getting out there, especially ones who wear a hijab, especially. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the role model in the Western world is a different type of role model that we can connect with. So a role model in the Western world would be somebody who is, you know, a pop star or half naked, hijab off, you know, that kind of stuff. Whereas our sort of connection with a role model is completely different, which does not appeal to the Western world. And that's why then they're not classed as role models in the Western world, if that makes sense. I can elaborate on that if you want me to. So those are the two main reasons. And the other third reason is that Muslim women, especially in hijabs, are not going to overexpose themselves on, you know, TikTok and all of these other social media which is out there, which is there, you know, for the teenagers, and not going to expose themselves in the way that appeals to the teenagers nowadays either, which is all about, you know, which is all about fashion and makeup and nakedness, and advertising is how you get into role modeling, good role modeling and stuff. So there's a difference there within the religion and also in the modesty as well of Muslim women.
I just wanted to just add to that, that when we say role model, we have to talk about scale. If you ask any Muslim individual who your role models are, because we are so community focused, there will be the teacher, the mother, the neighbor, the person who raised and spent the kind of quality time to kind of support the community in multiple ways that they will cite. And if we're talking about global role models, that is where the role of the media may mitigate the emergence of global Muslim female role models. I mean, I don't know if you guys watch Marvel, but we had recently a Muslim Marvel superhero. Again, it was quite a Western Muslim superhero, but this was the West trying to fill a void of where is the Muslim superhero, right? And so they constructed a Muslim superhero on their terms. We didn't, the Muslim world wasn't able to produce a cartoon character basically that would appeal to young children. And so that shows you the power of culture, media, and the kind of influences that are most effective and most powerful today in the creation of what we think of as a role model. And then the alternative to that, just wanted to add that point. Let's take a final round of questions before we close. So 2 questions from the audience here. If you want to start, yeah, introduce yourself first.
My name is Rizwan. Yeah, quite a lot of interfaith work in South London. Yeah, a couple of things. One is, I think actually the title is a misnomer because we are actually in the postmodern world in a bit of a wilderness. So the modernism finished quite some time ago. So perhaps we need to have another discussion on the postmodern world and gender issues or gender, gender issues, correct. But on a more practical level, I mean, there are issues with Islamic law as set out, and the iniquities, or perceived iniquities of treatment between female and males, especially in the issue of testimony, for instance, where a female's testimony is considered half of the male one. When we know that actually some women are better than some men and have more integrity than some men. So there are these issues, and also in inheritance law as well, where the female has got half the share of the male. And yet there are some women who are the heads of the household. They have far more responsibility and they have far more to give back to their families than the male can. And this might be dictated by circumstances. So what I'm asking is basically, I mean, how do you go about addressing these traditional understandings of Sharia law because they are what are the impact on a practical level, Muslim societies, Muslim states, and underpin the laws, a lot of the Muslim countries. So as your title is Gender Issues, Islam and Gender Issues.
We did, I don't know if you came in late, but Dr. Mariam did talk about actually inheritance, and she did talk about that. And we can touch a bit about the application in the modern day, workarounds in Western society around these issues, maybe.
Yeah, perhaps, yeah. And I don't know if what your issue is about the postmodern era that we are in.
I'd argue some people would say we're postmodernism.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I've lost track at this point. Okay, then, Father Frank.
Thank you all. It is a very fascinating topic, and it is quite clear to me that the issue of women's rights and gender issues is a stick with which many in the West use to beat Islam above the head, as it were. It is a polemical argument, it's a polemical issue, and it's, in a sense, it's quite used as part of a cultural wars. It's a cultural war of some quarters in the secularized West to demonize and besmirch Islam. Now, you spoke about role models. I would want to broaden it out and say perhaps we should speak of paradigms, because a paradigm is wider than just a role model. Paradigm incorporates role models. And so some of you all have produced aspects of the Islamic paradigm to counteract this Western modernity, postmodernity, pseudo-modernity, call it what you will. But I mean, I especially liked what Sidra Naeem said about the question of importance of modesty, dignity, referring to some ways of dressing, which characteristic of Muslim women. And it is very important because you see, I'm a priest. Here, Christianity, church, certainly in this country, has completely lost a particular battle. We don't talk about modesty. We don't talk about dignity. Well, we may talk about dignity, but in fact, completely ignoring what's going on around. So Islam can contribute to this debate hugely to enhance human dignity and human values. And finally, only one minor worry about the question of spirituality, and Sidra Naeem mentioned it, compassion. How can one possibly be against compassion? But I remember that I was talking to a bishop, and we were talking about theological issues, and he said, "Oh, please, let's not talk about theology. Let us talk about spirituality." What he was really saying, he didn't really want to tackle the fundamental matters concerning teachings, historical teaching of the church. He just wanted to have some kind of bully, kind of blancmange kind of religion in which everything goes. So I think keep in mind the again the potential dangers of some emphasis on spirituality or compassion meant in a negative way.
Thank you, Father Frank. Thank you for that. Thank you for all your questions. We are going to just give our guests a minute each to respond to those two questions. The first one, it was about, how do we reconcile some Sharia laws with modern day maybe needs or demands? And Father Frank's question on the balance between spirituality and theology, but just in a minute, please. And just anything else you want to add.
He just mentioned that the issue of testimony, the woman testimony. I did clarify that the woman testimony is only mentioned in one verse in the Holy Quran, the verse that's talking about debt. And you are free to do it or not. It's a form of advice, it's not form of farida. So I can borrow money from Dr. Amina without making two men witnesses about the money that I took from her, or bringing one man. And there's a difference between ishhad and shahada. There's two different titles. Ishhad, that means when a judge wants to make sure about a killing issue, he can bring a woman to give her witness or to give her testimony, or he can bring a man or 2 women or 4 women or 30 women. This is the judge who wants to deal with the killing issue. But if I want shahada, ishhad, I am free to bring who I want for ishhad. And about shahada, there's some masail in Islam that you are dealing, for example, with zina. You need 4 witnesses, but 4 witnesses. Imam Ali, there was a case of women which is making a relationship with a man by force. And Imam Ali asked the woman, "Did you do this relationship with this man?" She said, "I was forced." And the man was saying, "No, she made this relation." And Imam Ali took the testimony of the woman over the testimony of the man. So it's not always woman testimony is half testimony of man. There's not always. This is. Yes, there are some scholars that took this ayah and tafsir. How can I tafsir?
Interpretation.
Yeah.
We'll need another jurisprudence lecture on these issues.
Maybe this was a part of my.
But I think it's general
and
question.
about gender issue, I just want to mention something very important. When we talk about gender as an issue, for me, I don't think it's an issue. It's something that we can have a dialogue on it. For me, for example, there is some sort of rights that some particular muassasat give it to a man, to a human. For example, Herbert Schiller was mentioning how the women in America start to smoke. He said that there's a sharika
company.
Yeah, there was a company who wanted to
sell.
Yeah, to sell their cigarettes, and they don't have much people to buy it. The other companies are much having customers. So what did they do? They said, we're gonna say women now she should smoke the same as the man. Why she should not smoke? And they printed some leaflets, and they go outside and said, no, the woman has the right of smoking. No, the woman has the right of smoking. And they didn't want the women right. They just want to sell their cigarettes. So there's some sort of rights that's being given to women, that's being given to the child, that's being given to the man, that's being given to the human being. I don't know what is the reason behind. So when you ask me what is my point of view about this right, I should tell you I should know what is the policy behind. Then I can form a point of view.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Amna, final words?
Sure, interesting points. This is somewhat speculative because it hasn't happened yet, but I do think the direction of Islamic law in the next few centuries is going to bifurcate. What we have is primarily what's been received through the tradition and primarily hasn't been questioned. There have been exceptions, and by that I mean until the 20th century. But a lot of things have been formulated and passed on, and I think we're going to see one group of people who's going to stay with what we understand from Islamic law as it is today, including certain things relating to men and women that were mentioned. And there are going to be other people who take other approaches, which, we know what they are. The approaches we're not supposed to talk about, like was this customary during the time of the Prophet, or, other means of deriving rulings. And there may be another set of interpretations. This is my view of what's going to happen. God knows best. As for the spirituality and compassion, my understanding of the Prophet Muhammad as someone who is described as a mercy to all the worlds is that there's never any case where spirituality and compassion are not meant to be part of the dialogue, especially regarding religious matters. I do find personally that once someone starts to become hardline and say that, there's just, red lines that we don't go across and everything goes, is that it, and that sort of thing, that's usually a prelude to them shutting down the discussion, either because of ignorance or because they want to exert their own authority or some sort of reason, and that's also oftentimes can be a prelude to violence. But I'm not saying I agree that everything necessarily goes in the world, but there are ways that these boundaries can usually be discussed among people, which doesn't necessarily require that sort of posturing. I mean, unless you've got like a madman with a gun shooting people or something like that, that's a red line. But in general, these sorts of issues that affect our day-to-day lives, can be discussed with listening and compassion and spirituality. And I think that's, what we should be doing, in my view.
Thank you, Dr. Amina. And Sidra, do you want to come in with some final thoughts?
Yes, I just wanted to answer the very first part, the one about, the financial matters, why, about the witnesses and also the inheritance. This is all to do with the different characteristics and roles of men and women. So if you look at, like the sister was talking about, the specific ayahs in which it's mentioned that there should be 2 female witnesses, they are either to do with financial matters, which men are better at maths because they are the providers, they are the financial providers of the family on the whole. And the other one is in terms of murder witnesses, women are more emotional. So then they get very, very stressed up when it comes to murder. Men are more emotionally stable. These are well-known facts. The other one about inheritance, why a man gets double, this is to do with the man's role of being the financial provider of the family. This is why he needs double money, because he is the financial provider. So he needs double money in inheritance to provide for the family. So it's to do with the individual characteristics or the roles of a man and a woman. That is why those verses were revealed. And if we follow Islam, it's still relevant today. Islam, if we follow Islam, those verses in the Quran are still relevant today and do work.
Thank you, Sister Sidra, for your contribution. Lastly, I just want to thank you, everyone, for coming. And I would really encourage you to take any further questions or points that you want to pick up with the guests over dinner, which you're welcome to have downstairs. And thank you all for coming. And we see you in the next Cultural Club.